This is Writers Not Writing, the show where you can get to know your favorite writers and soon-to-be favorite writers by listening to them confess to the ways they procrastinate. Thanks for procrastinating with us. I'm Benjamin Gorman, and the quiet guy behind the glass there is Doug the producer. I write novels and collections of poetry and stuff. Doug tries his best to make me sound better. And each week we have a secret word to listen for. If you catch it, you earn the right to take an extra break at the time of your choosing from whatever is stressing you out. From NotAPipePublishing, welcome to Writers Not Writing.
Today's secret word is Aristotelian.
If I take my time.
Hail and well met, readers and reviewers. I am very excited about our guest today. We have Charlie Gilkey, and Charlie and I have had the hardest time getting scheduled. You know, there's the normal things that get in the way. One person is sick or whatever. No, for Charlie and I, it was literally a power outage that prevented one of the times we wanted to get together. So finally, I have Charlie Gilkey here. Charlie has advised hundreds of teams from Fortune 100 companies to tiny nonprofits through Productive Flourishing, the coaching and training company he founded. His current book, Team Habits, How Small Actions Lead to Extraordinary Results, shows how changing your team habits is the most effective, enduring way to improve team performance and belonging. His previous book, Start Finishing, How to Go from an Idea to Done, is a Publisher's Weekly Fall 2019 Top 10 Business and Economics book, a Kirkus Review's Top Indie Book, and the winner of the Eric Hoffer Grand Prize in 2020. He's also a former Army logistics officer and a near PhD in philosophy. Charlie's coming to us today from Portland, Oregon. Charlie, I wanted to ask you about this near PhD in philosophy because I was an undergrad philosophy student. What was kind of your area of study in philosophy?
Well, there's a tale of two studies here. So before I deployed for Operation Iraqi Freedom in 2004, I would have told you it was the convergence of philosophy of science and the philosophy of religion, right? Right in that sort of mix of how do you reconcile these two different ways of understanding the metaphysics and the epistemologies and the things that come from that. So I was really fascinated about that. And is there a synthesis that makes sense,
Or
right?
compartmentalization, there's the different kinds of,
Yeah, so I did a lot of rich research and study on that and thinking on that. Then I deployed. And when I came back, I was like, I really, based upon some of the things I've seen and just, a year of standing in the sand and driving trucks, when people have learned how best to blow you up, has you thinking differently about much more practical things.
Yeah.
Right. And so I started studying ethics and social and political philosophy, right? And specifically just war, ethics, the ethics of political rights, and the conditions that help the individual and social conditions that enable the most thriving.
So did you say Augustine or Augustine?
It depends on the words that follow
philosophy
it.
classes.
Right. It depends on how it gets put in a sentence, to be honest. It's kind of like
right.
envelope
Yes,
and envelope, right?
But I'm sure just war theory, you're studying a lot of that gentleman, whichever
Studying
name.
a lot of like Augustine Augustine.
Right. Yes.
Right. Now you done messed me up, Benjamin.
Right.
Come
Well,
on.
no, I use that as an illustration in my classes for, what is the correct pronunciation? And I say to students, there is no correct, we are pronouncing it differently than they would have 2,000 years ago. It's okay to,
Well, I prefer the French take on some of this because in that language set and that family of languages, how you say it depends upon the context of the sentence. And so you might change a little bit of it because it might be easier to say Augustine in a certain way of saying it. And it might be, different to say it a different way depending upon the construction of the sentence. And to your point, this is not how they pronounce it anyways.
Right. It's not correct, the way we say Greek names when we're reading, Homer or whatever. It's not wrong. We're not speaking Greek. One of the things that I learned from my wife, which was a really valuable kind of learning, was, it had been pointed out to me previously that some of our correcting of pronunciation is inherently ableist because, sometimes, that is a struggle for folks for various reasons. But one of the things she pointed out to me is it also could be a sign of intelligence because it could mean the person has only read the word and never heard it in conversation because they're a reader. So instead of looking down on somebody, if they mispronounce a word, we should go, wow, they maybe read a lot of books, which is great.
This is probably getting us off topic, No, this is us. It's not off topic. I was watching a YouTube video, and there was a linguist. If you follow up with me, I'll send you the link that explained how Black English was more sophisticated than
Yes.
academic English.
Yep.
And his point was because of tone, accent, and another one, mood,
Mm,
that Black English often has all three to where modern, especially academic language only has two, right? And so like things like I've been trying to tell you in the Black community means something different. It's not that they're saying it
right.
incorrectly, is that that has a different meaning than I have than like I have been telling you,
Right. Well, and
right?
that does not surprise me at all because any community that has been forced to learn to code switch is bilingual. And
Correct.
that bilingualism allows, whether you speak Spanish and English or, Ave and English, allows you to go, okay, how do I want to say this now in this setting in a way that somebody who's monolingual just can't?
Yeah.
And so, yeah, it creates a richer kind of language. If you can choose to say, in this context, I'm going to say ax, and in this context, I'm going to say ask. You've got more vocabulary at your disposal.
Exactly. Well, what was interesting is he was presenting at a conference for transcriptionists. And the transcriptionists are trying to learn how to actually take what people were saying and convey their actual meaning. And so they were fixing
Fixing.
many fixing quote unquote many Black speakers into proper academic, proper formal
Yeah.
English, but missing the intention behind it.
Yeah.
Right. All right. And so like when you go back and read it, it's like, something like he worked there, but he ain't there. Right.
Right.
Right. That has a meaning
If
that
you try and change it to he worked there, but he isn't there, it loses it.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. And so, and I say that in case anyone's curious and it doesn't show up and you're not seeing a bio. I do come from the Black community. And so,
Right. Yes.
there are different things that I can address in these places that might be more uncomfortable for other people.
Right. Right.
But it's like the ability, well, there's both the ability, to your point, the ability to code switch, but also the necessity to code switch.
Uh-huh. Exactly.
Right, that you have to be able to say things that are close enough that people inside your community understand what you mean, but people who outside, especially in the history of the United States, to where speaking your native language, well, let's just say it had different penalties attached to it.
Yes, yes. And and I don't think it's any surprise as a consequence that folks who are bilingual, whether it's Ave and white academic English or it's another language, end up being some of our greatest writers, disproportionately some of our greatest writers, because they've had to think about language. I'm gonna, how am I gonna say this at the barber shop? How am I gonna say this when I'm talking to the cop? Like if you're forced to think about that, then you've got this richness that is available to you.
Yeah, I think that was not to stand on my laurels here, but you read sort of start finishing especially. My task in start finishing was really to take sometimes this very cerebral language around productivity and creativity and break it down and speak the language as the guide by the side as opposed to I know everything and this is exactly how you can do it. And so the rule I had when I was writing start finishing and then later team habits is whatever comes up comes out. However it comes up comes out, and I might edit it down the road, but because I think so much about cadence, I think so much about alliteration, I think so much about rhyme, I think so much about those types of things that like my editor would come back and change the sentence. And I'm like, that is technically correct. No one is going to remember that sentence,
Right.
right? I know it's to whom,
Yep.
right? But you drop a to whom on somebody, right?
Yep.
And you've already set up the stiltedness
Yeah.
that makes you inaccessible. And especially given the feedback that I've gotten over the many decades of doing this, that people already feel that I'm inaccessible because of some of the things you've mentioned. I'm like, I gotta work differently here. Right. And so just the ability to do that. And so that, was real. I was especially because Start Finishing was my first traditionally published book, not my first book, but my first traditionally
Yeah.
published book. I'm like, I want this to speak to the people who normally are not spoken to.
Yeah. Well,
Um,
not to blow smoke, but we met at Jesse Kwok's Author Alchemy Summit, and one of the
mhm,
things that impressed me so much about you is a lot of the folks who are, you know, productivity quote unquote experts really have found a way that works for them. And you were so knowledgeable about, here's, somebody I've studied who has this suggestion, and here's somebody I've studied who has this, and find what works. And then to be able to translate that into language that is accessible, interesting, but it wasn't just, here is the one, I am the guru, and here is the one way you have to be. But here's, kind of this body of research that you have studied, and here are all these insights that you could bring and drop in place. I was like, oh, okay, somebody who is not just trying to be the goop guru, but who's saying, okay, here's some things that will actually work for you. And I was just like, I'm taking notes furiously and going, that may work for me. So I really appreciated that.
Thank you. Well, I mean, that's a byproduct of having studied philosophy, one, right? And also my military background, where it's like there are tons of approaches and tactics and strategies, but not one solution is going to fit every scenario, right? So the very thing that I might say that might work for someone who's neurotypical might not work for someone who's neurodivergent,
Right.
right? And I need to know that, right? I need to do a better job than some of my colleagues of, one, tailoring it for, say, the ND crowd, but also, I'm getting myself in trouble here, Benjamin. I'm gonna get some emails about this one. Also, reminding ND folks that, like, you don't get to opt out of figuring out your way, right?
Yeah.
There is a way that works for you, and
Yeah.
there is a way that can work, but you don't get to opt out of there not being a way, right?
Yeah.
And again, send me the emails, right?
No, but I mean, as my wife is, somebody who has ADHD and has been learning and researching that extensively over the last, I mean, she's known since childhood, but it was in, adulthood and being, in management and, that kind of thing, learning how to find the advantages, because there are certainly advantages.
Seriously. Yeah.
But also what works. And
Yeah.
some of her strategies would not, I mean, she shows up for work like 45 minutes early and sits in her car to get herself prepared. That would drive me crazy. I roll into work like 5 minutes early. Bosses, are you hearing me? Early, 5 minutes late, often 5 minutes late. And that morning decompression time, because I'm an extrovert. I'm not really fully going until I'm with my students. Like then my brain is working. She needs time to prepare for that. And so, learning strategies, what works for you.
Yep. And there's not one way. That's what I will say. There is not one way that works for everybody. But when it comes to this stuff, there is a way that can work for you. And your task is to find that way, and understanding that the you that's in the object of that sentence changes and evolves over time, but also day to day, right? So so there is a version of Charlie who is very organized and on top of it, has thought about things. I can roll in, I'm ready to go because I've already done the mental layering to get there. There's a certain system that works for that version of Charlie. There's also the creative space cadet Charlie.
Yeah.
Right. That is so like, it's like, I can't get my ducks in a row. I don't even know how many ducks I got. Let's start there. How am I going to get them in a row? Like there are two. And so knowing that, wait a second, I'm not one unit that works a certain way. It's like, oh, if I'm in that latter version, one, is that actually the exact space I need to be?
Yeah.
For different reasons, and not trying to fix and change that.
Yeah, the metaphor I use with kids is, and this is so dated that they will never probably understand this, is how do I hit the clutch in order to change gears? Like, okay, I am realizing that I am in this mode right now and I need to change gears, but I can't do that until I depress the clutch.
Look, luckily motorcycles still exist, and there are plenty of sports cars that still are. Yeah. So you're not that dated, Benjamin.
There are a few gearheads in the classroom who are like, oh, I get it. But yeah, we have to be able to go, okay, shift. We're doing this other thing, and
but also like maybe when you make that shift, this is a point from start finishing. I know you have questions. We might get to them and not.
It doesn't matter.
Right. But it's like when you need to make that shift, don't make it a character assassination at the same time. Like
Yeah.
you're wrong or broken, or you just can't get right, or you just wired to not be able to get your shit together. Like whatever that is like, no, no, no. Functionally, this way of operating is not helping me achieve what I'm trying to do.
Yeah.
Right. It's not that it's bad. It's just not what's needed in this moment.
Yeah, and maybe it was working and now
Correct.
it's not working. And
Correct.
that's okay. It was working. Well, speaking of which, so we always tell everybody about the costumes we're wearing because the listeners can't see what we're wearing. And you have been doing some decompressing and getting out. So tell everybody about your costume for the show today.
So my costume for the store today, you can't tell, but I actually have like a gas mask on and I've got the mic on the inside. And the reason about this is like I've been camping and the Oregon wildfires. I'm like, man, how am I going to actually be able to do this interview with smoke all around me? Right.
Uh-huh.
Because I don't want to leave this place. And so I
Yep.
was like, you know what I could do? I could take that gas mask that I have from the occupation of 2020, right? Which
Yes.
you don't know about Portland. Do your homework, right?
Yeah.
I could take my
The
gas
air
mask
was
from the
spicy.
occupation, put a mic in it and call it good to go.
There you go. Yeah, and I'm in my camping gear, which is this fishing hat that I have put safety pins in, and the safety pins not only will hold I can put fishing hooks and lures and stuff right into the hat, but also I learned that I am middle-aged enough to have the magnetic sunglasses,
Mm.
and I can just attach the magnetic sunglasses to the safety pins in the hat. So I am the least fashionable person when I'm in camping mode, like walking around with fishing lures and my clip-on sunglasses attached to my hat. But it works.
It
It's
works.
it's
And let's be real,
functions.
Benjamin. Like
That's
you're
right.
not the most fashionable person when you're not camping. So
Yeah,
there we go.
exactly. Yeah. So what have you been doing when you are in addition to camping, but like pop culture wise, what's been pulling you away from your work lately?
Oh, so I have a love hate relationship with YouTube, especially YouTube Red. Right. I don't
Mm.
watch much TV anymore because unless it's like Star Trek, like the last thing of Star Trek Discovery, like I really did not want Star Trek Discovery to end. And when that last episode, I almost got teary-eyed. I don't do that often, but I was
That's
like,
good. I have not seen this one yet, so that's good to hear that it really gets to,
I want more of that. That Discovery presented a future that's closer to the future I want to live in and believe is possible for us as a humanity. Right. And humanity or sapient species, whatever.
yeah.
Right. And so that if you would have asked me like when we were talking, when you were having a power outage, it probably would have been closer to Star Trek Discovery and just thinking about the future and in that sort of way. Now it's I get on these damn reaction videos on YouTube. And I love watching people react to stuff. And so
Yes.
yeah, that is the pop culture thing. It's not one. I mean, I could list some artists, but that's a genre that I have of like, people like black folks listening to Chris Stapleton or Home Free for the first time and just being like, "What?"
What?
Right?
Yes,
Or
I love it.
metal and being like, "This is
I have a
dope."
couple people I follow on TikTok who are, listening to Rage Against the Machine for the first time and like listening to the lyrics and going, "Oh, this is really good."
This
Like,
is
yeah,
legit,
it's really
right?
good.
Or Fredo and the many funny things that Fredo will say. So that's, you know, my way to get myself back to writing is to not allow myself to pay for YouTube Red because then I have to watch commercials and I'm out.
Yep.
Like I get so pissed. I'm like, nope,
Yeah.
I'm done.
Yeah, even Amazon Prime now. I was watching the Boys, and
Mm.
they've plugged in commercials, and I'm like, oh, this is a good time to dip out because apparently you don't want me here. So
Apparently you don't want me here. Like, what are you doing with my money? I thought I was paying to opt out of this.
yeah, I pay you for these ads. Really, Jeff Bezos, you need this money more than Yeah. So
Yeah, stop building your rocket ship and get rid
yeah,
of my commercials, damn it.
Jeff, if you're listening, adding
Jeff.
ads when I already pay for Amazon Prime is a way to make me go, see ya, I can go to another service.
Yep, yep.
Um, So what about in the news? I mean, it has been a wild time. What has been pulling you away from your work lately?
Well, since I've been camping since basically Juneteenth, well, how political do we get on this
Oh,
show?
as political as you want. It's funny, on last week's show, I was talking with James L. Sutter about our kind of fantasy, and the fantasy was Biden announces he's retiring or announcing he's not going to run again and endorses Kamala. And then it happened. And we were like
Look,
hoping
y'all
for
need to
the,
get
the
together and
Aaron
speak.
Sorkin version, but it was pretty great.
Well, after Trump regime won and looking back, or Trump reign won, I was like, that dude got 5 years of my life
Yep.
rent free, just living in my brain.
Yeah.
And so when this year started again, I'm like, I'm not doing that again.
Yeah.
I am not. And I know because of his unique talents, right? It's going to dominate the media landscape and you
Yep.
can't get away from it.
Yeah.
Right.
He
And
knows how to
so,
worm his way into attention.
I actually have not been keeping up with news because you can't get the good news without the Trump splatter.
Yeah.
Right. And so luckily, like if you've read any books about this, or if you go way back to the 4 Hour Work Week when Tim Ferriss was talking about that, it is true that the really relevant news will reach you.
Yeah.
The really important stuff will reach you if you stop watching it. And so my wife, when I deployed for Iraqi freedom, we used to watch CNN a lot. And that little ticker tape around the bottom of this many troops killed and things like that. She had to stop watching news
Yeah.
and TV because of that, and she never picked it back up.
Yeah.
Right. And her mental health is so much better. So it's a lame answer, but there's
Not a
not a
bit.
whole lot in the news because like I know about Biden's thing, because that's just one of those things. Your friends text you, everybody
Right.
texts you,
Yes.
because that is such historical news. Because I don't know when it's happened before.
Right.
Right.
No.
And so yeah, I've largely been out.
Yeah. Well, and a lot of it you can curate with who you're connected with via email. Like
Mhm.
I email my congressman and say, do X, Y, and Z, please. And so when the news hits, my congressman is the one who's saying, congresswoman now is saying, hey, give me money. Also, here's some stuff you need to know. And
Yeah.
it is a way to, just stay connected to the most up-to-date news. So yeah, you're right. I don't, I've also listened to a lot of podcasts, which, like you say, is not always healthy. Sometimes I'm like, this is, political podcast number 3. It's the same news they're covering, and their analysis isn't that different at this point. This isn't good for me. So
Yeah. Well, and it's what is the diminishing return of this amount of information. Like I was talking to my best friend who, when I was explaining what we're doing for camp life and working from camp, and I was like, look, man, like the limit, because, and for a different reason than you were having power issues, like we've had to learn how to do power management because I've been working and doing interviews. I've been doing all that kind of whatnot from camp. Right. And so when we're using solar, now we have a generator, but I was like, both for personal mental health reasons, but also for just power management. Like after about 6 hours of screen time, that's all we have for the day.
that's kind of great.
And
So,
so, and those screen times are like meetings like this where I'm on Zoom is not watching TV. Right.
right.
And he sat back, and my wife, like because she's currently on medical leave, if she puts in like 30 minutes a day of screen time, that's a lot. Now,
Yeah.
Kindles don't count as screens, just for the record, right? So
Yeah.
we can still read a lot. But what we mean is stuff that's interrupting, grabbing your attention, and so on and so forth. And so he stepped back and he's like, I don't even know what my world would be like if that was the most amount of screen time that I had.
Yeah.
Right.
And you were gone for how long? That's a almost a month.
Almost a month. Yeah.
Yeah.
Almost a month. And so, yeah, but even before that, that's been one of my productivity experiments this year
Yeah.
is like, w- is it possible for me to do the writing I want and run this business and show up the way that I want professionally in 6 hours or fewer a day?
Yeah. And
Right.
how successful did you feel about the experiment?
It's still an ongoing experiment, but you figure out there's just a lot of BS that you do.
Yep.
Right. There's just a lot that you get into that is I forget the creator who said it this way, but it's kind of like you're LARPing your job.
Yeah.
Right, as opposed to thinking about that, because for me, I always think about it in little s seasons as opposed to capital S seasons. Like when I'm writing a book, the metrics of productivity per se are different
Mm-hmm.
than when I'm on a book tour,
Yeah.
right? That are different when I'm on post book tour and I'm doing advising or speaking around that, right?
Yeah.
And so it shifts in that sort of way. And, way back in 2014, 2015, I was dancing with burnout. And I realized that one of the reasons I was dancing with burnout is because writing, especially drafting, I wasn't counting that as work.
Yeah.
I
It's
wasn't
work.
counting that as like time, counting meetings. I was counting all of the sort of stuff around the writing as work. But I'm like, well, no shit, Sherlock. Like if you're getting up and you're writing from like 6 to 9:30 or 10,
Yeah.
and then you're in meetings from 11 until 4:30 or 5, it's not that you're working from 11 to 4:30 or 5. It's you got to look at that writing work
Yeah.
as part of it. And so that started creating a lot of different pressures about like what's a realistic amount of work that this one human named Charlie can do. And we have to be careful here, especially for writers. And I know we're talking about writers not writing. Like there's this weird thing that happens when your hobby becomes your job,
Yes.
right? And you end up in all sorts of weird ways about it because, if your hobby is your side thing, or if it's your side hustle, or you go to work with a day job and then you do another thing, then your writing specifically, if that's your hobby, is closer to playing video games,
Yeah.
right? Like you really get forward to doing or whatever other things you're doing. But when that is actually the center point of what you do, like even though I spend a lot of time advising, spend a lot of time on podcasts, right? I make a significant portion of my living directly or indirectly from words,
Right.
from writing, right? And so it's this weird thing in that, and I think you were there when I was explaining this to people at the telesummit. I was, or not the summit, the author alchemy summit. I was like, look, if you are a writer, um, you have to look at that creative act as essential to who you are, like eating and breathing and doing those types of things. Okay. It's not one of those things you get to put off
Yeah.
because everyone knows the angry writer who's angry because they haven't been writing enough.
Yeah.
Right. And so it becomes essential in that way. But just because it's essential doesn't mean it's free.
Right.
Doesn't mean that it gets a free ride on it. It stacks into that. And so that's been the hardest thing about the trade-off this year, Benjamin, is that can I get all with all of the wonderful commitments that I've had from the books coming out and everything, like, do I get enough time writing in that 6 hours and doing everything else? No.
Yeah.
It's a trade-off. But I also know to pretend like writing is free is going to pay off because it turns out in September I'm just fried because I've been writing for 4 or 5 hours a day and then running a normal schedule, right? And so that's the hard part right now is that um if for any of the writers out there, whether you're a hobby writer or a full-time writer or whatever you call yourself, you know how easy it is to get into a 2 to 4 hour writing streak,
Yeah.
right? So if you're trying to keep things to 6 hours a day, you really got to be careful what you schedule or unschedule.
Well, and that was one of the things that I really took from you that I valued was, being very thoughtful about the scheduling of the creative time, because my inclination, and the authors that I work with will love hearing this. I run a small press, and I always feel like I signed a contract with these people. Their projects come first. This book has got to be out by this time, which means the interior files got to be done by this day, and the cover's got to be done, and and those things take precedence. And then my writing time would be okay. If I get everything else done, then I get around to my writing. And like you said, the challenge then becomes you get to the point where I haven't written in a month because I've been working on everybody else's books first. And so scheduling time to say I'm gonna, and it can be a whole day, this day is going to be a writing day, whatever works for folks, in terms of their scheduling. Some people can do, 45-minute or half an hour writing stints, and I need longer stretches, but I've got to schedule in that time or else I'll be really miserable.
Yeah, I mean, when we look at it, and many of the spiritual traditions like talk about this, and they link the destructive power and the creation power in divinity, right? Because it turns out that we creators, we're either going to be creating something or we're going to be destroying something, right? And everyone who gets to the point, I call it, and start finishing, I call it, who gets to that point of creative constipation. Like, you've got all the ideas, you've got all the stories, you've got all the sort of things, and they want to come out. Well, just like physical constipation, if they don't come out, it gets toxic really, really quickly.
Yeah.
Right. And so most of the time, I think for the working writer, it's what is that amount of time of, there's sort of three kinds of writing here. There's reflective writing, which is largely just about yourself, what's going on, how you might sort yourself. There's explanatory writing. You have a thing and you're just going to explain it. And then there's exploratory writing, which you're exploring. And many fiction writers are actually on the exploratory side,
Yeah.
right? And that is the hardest type of writing, right? Because it's like, I don't know where this is going. Even
Yeah.
if you could be the best plotter in the world, but if that character starts talking,
Yeah.
right, so and so forth, like, you're like, oh, well, that, I guess this is where this is going
Yeah.
right now,
This character has
right?
decided the story's going in a different direction. Okay.
Right. Okay. Well, let's see where this goes. And so, as a writer, it's like you have to figure out how you can stay in tune with your writing.
Yeah.
And it doesn't mean that you're always hard drafting or you're always cranking those, but like, if there's a period of time, like, the most crotchety of the writers that I know are those writers who have allowed themselves to get rusty. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, I don't have the words, I don't know how this does, blah blah. And you go on and it's like, dude, you're just rusty.
Yeah.
Right. Your brain to finger to keyboard connection is off. That's all this is. Like, the writer hasn't gone away.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, or one of the things I've seen a lot, and you've talked about this too, is once you get to the place where your writing is paying the bills,
Mhm.
now it is you've monetized it, and that can be okay. Now there's no joy in this anymore. Now it's stress of, if I don't put out these words, I don't pay the rent.
Yeah.
Changes the nature of that writing process from, this is the way that I step away from my day job and enjoy myself, to, this is my day job and it's very scary that I don't have the number of words because I need to be able to pay the power bill. And so some of the authors I've met who are, particularly crotchety, are the ones where they used to enjoy what they were working on, and now they probably would have evolved and be writing something else, but they're chasing the market because they need to, and they're writing the same story and they're not enjoying themselves anymore. And it comes across not just in the way that they interact socially, it comes across in the writing. Like, if this was not enjoyable to you, that's bad for the reader.
It's
And so
bad for the
figuring out
reader.
how to
Yeah,
find joy in
absolutely.
it is a challenge at that point.
Yeah. Well, I think, and so I, for your listeners, I don't know who all you've talked to, but I'm probably one of the least interesting writers as far as diversity of writing, because I'm a nonfiction writer. Like, I don't really do fiction, right? And it's just not my beat, right? And so for nonfiction writers, especially if you've started to develop a platform and people know you about certain things, you're much like that musician who has performed a certain way and people like the hits.
Right.
And then you're like, well, I'm incorporating new styles and new themes. And they're like, play me more of the hits. What's,
Yeah.
hit song version B. That's not how this works, man. Right.
Yeah.
And especially when you look at the platform world that we live in, to where there are very definite square holes for the square content and triangle
Yeah.
holes for the triangle content. You get to a place where it's like, it's especially for me, who tends to span a lot of different worlds and use a lot of metaphorical writing and allegorical writing. Like, half the things that I end up writing about is like, there is no SEO for this. No one is, this is not how someone is going to think about this and search for this problem.
Yeah.
And so I'm sort of left in this position. It's like, well, I know as a strategist and as someone who knows the craft, I know if I change the headline and the writing and the words quite frankly, that's going to get more clicks.
Right.
It's going to get more attention than if I write it this way, which is actually how it came to me, which is the more artistic or philosophical side of it, right?
Yeah.
And so there's always this balance of like, okay, what's my aim here? And if my aim is to be helpful and to help more people unlock their talents and more people to do that, that means I'm making sacrifices, not for the money per se, right? That's a right on, but like I need Benjamin to read this thing,
Yeah.
right? That's related to that. So I'm going to go with the way that's more accessible, the way that it's likely to do. Now I might be able to sprinkle in some of my own ways of getting there, right? But at the end of the day, like those words have a job, and it's
Right.
my job to help them do that job.
You know, I'm thinking about your writing and your writing style and your personality and what you bring to it. Have you ever read C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity, and then the Screw Tape Letters?
I haven't read Mere Christianity, no.
Okay, so if you've read the Screw Tape Letters, you've read Mere Christianity. And the
Okay.
reason I think about this for you is so the books have the exact same points. So
Mhm.
if you've got to be, rehashing the hits, but what he did was in one of them, it's this is the way to you should live according to me. And it is dry. Mere Christianity is like, here's what I think is essential, and here's what I think is less essential. And that's it. It's not a bad book, but it's pretty dry. And then Screw Tape Letters is here's a demon who shows up and says, you want to screw people up, here's all the things that are really essential, and let's get them to focus on other stuff, and it messes them up. But the fundamental ideas are identical. Like even structurally, the points he's making are almost the same. And I thought for you, it would be really fun because you've got the skill set to say, okay, I've written the book on how to make your team more effective. Now, here's the fictional account of somebody who wants to screw up teams in every terrible way. And you could write a very funny book that makes the same points about. There was a book I read. I'm blanking on the author's name, but the title of the book is How to Fuck Up Your Startup, and
Mhm.
it's this guy saying rather than focusing on how to make your startup work, here are all the ways that it could not work, and but he didn't have your creativity. I think you would write. He was going based on his own personal experience of screwing up a lot of startups,
Yeah.
but I think you could do the kind of fictionalized version of if you don't take my advice, here's how it could all go wrong.
I
So,
appreciate that because I've had some people suggest that my next book, it would be good if it were a parable,
yeah.
or a fictionalization of some of the ideas. When you look at Pat Lencioni's work of the five dysfunctions of a team, he actually took a lot of that and wrote it as that sort of parable of like, here are the dysfunctions and here's
Yeah.
how to fix them. But I haven't done that. If you look at team habits specifically, right? They're, not to pull the reader too much into it because I know you might not care about reader, you might or listener, you might not care about the book, but like it has 8 categories of team habits. I'll give a couple as an example. So one is belonging, another is meetings, and another I'll just say decision making. Right. There's got 5 other ones. Right. When you look at how bad teams can be, right? Think about the ways in which people just crap on each other, talk
Hmm.
over each other, marginalize each other, run towards each other with knives. Like I could just list all of the anti-patterns of belonging,
Well, and,
right?
and it could be interesting to say here is, as a leader of a team, not just a member of a team, as a leader of a team, here's how you undermine belonging.
Yep.
And so this is how a dysfunctional team could work, that isn't just like listing grievances, but that's like these are the behaviors, the actions that make a team less effective. And
Yeah.
I'm sure, between military and corporate, you've seen a lot of different behaviors that you can go watch out for this, but you can
Yeah.
frame it
Well, it,
as
it
do
also
this if you
reminds me
want to
of
destroy
Robert.
your team.
Yeah. It also reminds me of Robert Greene's, I think it's 52 laws of powers or 48 laws of power. It's
Oh
one
yeah.
of those two numbers, right? And it's like you read that book to know all of the different ways in which people are using power against you.
Yeah.
It's kind of like knowing enough of the dark side to know, oh crap, like that is it coming at me,
Yep.
but also this is me starting to participate in it.
Yeah.
Right. And so many of us read the book not to deploy that kind of power, but to know what they are. So we
Hmm.
know where our own personal boundaries are, but also we know when someone's starting to sort of like, oh, That's number 6.
Right.
Okay.
Oh yeah. I one summer in college, I had a door-to-door sales job, and the training for that was so valuable in the rest of my life to go, oh, okay, I see what this salesperson is doing. To protect yourself from the
Yeah.
tactics because they're really effective. Get the person nodding and saying yes to meaningless pablum. Like if you ever working with a salesperson and they're asking you rhetorical questions that are just yes answer, yes answer, yes answer, it's because they want you to just go, well, I'm in the habit of saying yes. And then when they close, you're like, well, I've been nodding for an hour. I guess I'll nod to this. So like learning those so that, when that salesperson starts employing those, I'm like, I see what you're doing. I see what
Yeah.
you're
Yeah.
Say
Like if you walk
no
on a
to,
car lot
is
and
the
you're
Pope
like,
Catholic? And you really throw them off.
yeah, yeah. It's like walking on a car lot and the qualifying question that they'll throw out at you is, hey, are you thinking about buying this cash or credit? Like, or cash or getting it on financing? Never
Yep.
answer that question.
Yep.
Right. Say you haven't
I
figured it
haven't
out yet.
decided to buy this yet.
I haven't
I'm not
decided to
saying
buy it
yes
yet. I haven't really determined how I'm going to do it because that throws them off. Because if you say yes or no, they start their sales
Mhm.
process based upon that, and you don't know what you've agreed to. So it's
Yeah.
just like, yeah, I'm not really sure. Like, what's your budget? Well, I'm still just sort of assessing what's going
Mhm.
on here and what's going to be the right fit for me. So the more of those that you can sort of throw them off, right? And you're on your
Yep.
game. And then when you're ready, you start hitting them with your questions like, oh crap, like I don't have a playbook for
Well,
this scenario.
to bring it back to the kind of political sphere, his name's not Tom Schneider. I'm getting his name incorrectly here. Timothy Schneider's On Tyranny. Nice, very short book about how fascism works, essentially. And it's, things to watch out for, and having that kind of repertoire ready so that when somebody says we should ban this book. Why? Because I think it may be problematic with the next regime, and so we're going to censor ourselves in advance. Like, watch out, that's how it grows. So learning those the ways that it works, or hey, we're going to get you involved in oppressing this group, because once you're engaged in oppressing this group, then you feel part of a movement and you're willing to oppress the next and the next and the next, and next thing you know, it's your own. But
Mhm.
first, let's get you in on, let's attack the group with the least power. Let's go for, female NCAA swimmer trans athletes. Like, this is the major crisis of your life. They don't care. They're trying to get you engaged so that then they've got you in, and you're going, well, I participated when we were attacking them, I have seen in my own life people get sucked into, okay, but I do care about attacking this group, and not realizing this is essentially a sales tactic,
Well, it's a sales and it's commitment consistency because
Yeah.
once you started that habit of marginalizing some people, it's easier to erode the category of people
Yes.
that you can marginalize or oppress once you've already started that,
Yeah.
right? And so it's like they got to get you to marginalize or oppress someone,
Yeah.
right? I
Yep.
don't care who, which is, to the point is like when you look at in the media, like, I think one of your questions was like, what's the topic? And I'll go there, right? I was reading this caught my attention because it was so absurd, but it was like a legislator in California that was trying to make a bill to limit the operation of Clear, which is the plane ID company,
Oh
right?
yeah.
From operating in the airport, and it was the weirdest thing because it's like I'm not trying to shut them down. I just don't want other people to see them and have to engage with the people's country because like it's not fair that you get to buy your way to the front of the ticket or
Right.
to the front of that and so on and so forth. And so it's not that I don't think there should be a service for that. I just don't want the other people to have to see that. And I'm like, so you just said like you're willing for injustice to happen. You just don't want people to see the
Yes,
injustice.
exactly.
And I'm like, bro, like we have a lot of issues to deal with. This was from California, so I'm Oregonian. So, but I was like, let's think broader. Like, this is the issue
Yes.
of all the things you could be
Well,
working on. This,
and I have to wonder if that was I am in line. I see this thing as a legislator. It irritates me personally. And my response is, I'm going to make a law about that. Like,
Yeah.
maybe that shouldn't be your highest priority. Are the,
Yeah, and it was
firefighters
like,
being paid appropriately?
there's this
Like,
other thing called TSA pre that plenty of people use.
right.
Right. I'm one of them. Right. So I'm
Yeah.
like, well, how is that? I paid for the same thing. Like what their levels is. And oh, let's not tell the people about charter flights. Oh,
Right.
they're going to be upset that people don't have to get on a normal plane. They can just charter a flight or they can own their plane. I was like, where is this coming from, man? Like spend your time on something else.
Yeah. Or
Right.
yeah, absolutely. So one of the kind of silly questions I love to ask authors is, if you were in a Dungeons and Dragons game, what would be your race and class? Just as kind of a Rorschach to get to know you. So if you yourself, Charlie Gilkey, were the character in this fantasy world, what would be your race and class?
So this one's always a hard one for me. Right. This is like, which Marvel character would you be?
There you
Right.
go.
Is that sort of question. And so I tend to end up being the battle master fighter. Right. Just because I'm like, y'all, if we just get here, and so I end up orchestrating it in
Right,
that
right.
way in the
Logistics.
current.
Make sure that the battle plan actually works.
Yeah, and so in the last fourth edition of D&D, I was a taxi bard, and the whole point of a taxi bard is it through teleportation moves enemies and players into hotspots or away from hotspots. And part of the reason I knew I needed to do that is because I joined a group, already a high level group, and they would not focus fire on like the right enemies at the same time. Just like, why are we attacking 6 different enemies? Like this makes no sense.
Yeah.
And of course, with my background in the military and leading tactics and things like that, I'm like, that one, everybody hit that one. So I would literally have to do one of two things: take the players that I wanted to attack the thing and put it right next to the thing,
Yeah.
or put the thing that I wanted the players to attack and put it on top of them.
Yeah.
Right. And so I spent all of my time just orchestrating, getting people in the right places, right, to make that happen. Right.
Which is, I mean, you're right. Talk about it's team habits, and it's start finish. Like, it's absolutely talk about your wheelhouse. How do we make this team actually effective?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, okay,
Right.
so we somehow ended up with a party of 6 people and we have three brawlers. No one talked about this.
Yeah.
But how are we going to make this 3-baller? Like, we've had some crazy with this group. I love this group. We've had some crazy configurations of teams that should not work.
Yeah.
Our D&D or our DM is so flabbergasted because he's like, this is not supposed to work. And yet
Yeah.
you all manage to figure this out every time. Right. And then do some weird sort of thing. Right. And that's part of the fun at this point of that group is like, we'll come up with the most oddball characters and clashes of classes that shouldn't work. And somehow we do, right? Make it work.
It's excellent practice for you in seeing team dynamics. How can this team actually be effective?
Yeah, I actually had to step away from the group because I told our DM, I was like, look, with this group, all you have to do is have us walk into a room and there's a chair in the room. This group might spend 3 hours figuring out what's going on with this chair. Should you trust a chair? And there's a whole dialogue about the chair, and it's just literally a chair in a room.
It's a DM's dream. They don't have to come up with a billion things.
Oh no. We've come up with so many memes. We've come up with so many characters. We've come up with so many things that have seeded the world. So many minor characters that we blew up out of proportion that he then had to make major character, but it was a minor character the whole time. Like so many things like that. So it was fun, but at a certain point I told him, I was like, this is actually a bit too close to work for me.
Right. Yes, exactly. Yes. I'm going to start charging you a consulting fee for every time I show up.
Yeah.
That's excellent. Okay, well, we're going to go to our ad break. And then when we come back, I'm going to ask you what you've been daydreaming about lately. Special announcement time. NotAPipePublishing has always been committed to helping authors and readers find one another. Well, the show, which is all about helping readers get to know writers, just hit a milestone: 10,000 views on YouTube. So to celebrate, instead of charging authors to advertise their books on the show, I'm going to run your ads for free throughout 2024. If you want to make a 30 to 60 second video about your book, Let folks know what it's about and where to find it. And don't forget your name and the title. I'll run one or two of those in our ad spot each week. Just send an MP4 file to the NotAPipe email address in the show notes. Let's fix up some readers and authors into reader relationships. 2024. More readers, more writers, more books.
Cold Rising. Algo and their team of enforcers take on the underbelly of Geneva megacity before being sent on a mission to Mars, a cesspit of corporate exploitation. Suan, a child laborer, must turn the heart of Agent Algo while the fate of Mars, her friends, and her family hang in the balance. Cold Rising. Cold Rush novella, available now on Amazon. No one wants to live in a country ruled by wizards, unless the alternative is worse. Peter Watts, author of Blindside, says, a near-perfect blend of implacable horror, gallows humor, and ecological apocalypse. Nick Namatis, author of The Second Shooter, says, relentlessly radical and often hilarious. Cascade, Book 1 in the Sleep of Reason trilogy, by Rachel A. Rosen. Available now at bookshop.org, Apple Books, Barnes & Noble, Amazon, and at bppress.ca.
I'm realizing I need to do a better job of telling folks this. People can't know what we refuse to share. I'm a big fan of audiobooks. I've been doing a ton of work in my yard, and audiobooks have been my constant companions throughout. I know there are some people who say reading an audiobook doesn't count as reading. They are wrong. Reading with your ears requires some of the same skills as reading with your eyes, and some distinct skills, but it's still creating meaning from a text, and it counts. I have 5 of my books out in audiobook, on Audible and Amazon. The Convention of Fiends, Book 1, Don't Read This Book, and Book 2, You Were Warned. Corporate High School is narrated by Crystal Kay, and she did an amazing job. I narrated The Digital Storm with some cool voice changer software for some of the characters, so that sounds like a bit of an ensemble. And I recorded one of my collections of poetry, This Uneven Universe, as a gift for my wife Crystal, who wanted to be able to listen to it while driving. So if audiobooks are a way you enjoy reading, check those out. And if you like them, let me know, readers and reviewers. So welcome back, everybody. I'm here with Charlie Gilkey. And Charlie, when you've been daydreaming lately, what's been percolating?
I know I'm supposed to have something really interesting here, but it's mostly stuff around RV life. We've been camping, and so we're thinking our next upgrade is, getting a small RV trailer or something like that. So again, I sound like I'm probably 58 and on the cusp of retirement. I understand that, y'all. But that's been most of what my daydreams are, because for me, this year I've been pushing work from anywhere to the extreme, right? And so um I realized that nature Charlie is the best version of Charlie.
Yeah.
And so if my job is primarily either on the creative side to write words that matter and help people thrive individually or in their teams, like that's one of the dimensions of performance there. The other is to be the best advisor that I can be,
Yeah.
right? Then what are the conditions that set that up? And me being in nature and that kind of whatnot is a major contributor to that.
Yeah. You do a consultancy that's not just like I go speak at at this corporate, but it's like one-on-one coaching too, right?
Yeah, I do executive coaching. I do team executive coaching. So I'm typically the guy you bring in when you have a group of leaders or you have a group of teammates, and much like the D&D scenario, like we have good people, we just don't know how to put them together to work as a team and play the same game and put the same points on the board, right? I come into so many teams, to use the metaphor, where part of the team is playing American football and the other part of the team is playing world football, right? Or soccer, right?
Yeah.
and they really don't see that they're playing, or actually it's a better analogy. One group is playing rugby and the other group is
Yeah.
playing football. They're very, very close, but they are not the same game.
Yeah.
Right. And so, typically when I come into a business, it's a long-term relationship, because these types of changes, relational changes, system changes, do not happen
Yeah.
like all at once. And so as much as I love the pay of a keynote, I love the transformation of the coaching and long-term advising work that I do.
Yeah. Yeah. And so the RV life, when you can connect via Zoom and be your best self for that coaching, you're bringing a different kind of facet to that connection, I can imagine.
Absolutely. Well, because one of the things that happens at work is we have this tendency to think that we are the only one experiencing what we're experiencing. And the ability to, whether I'm working in a team dynamic and they're like, I don't know, I'm just overwhelmed and everybody else has got their things figured out. And I'm like, no, that's not actually what's happening
Yeah.
here. Right. And on the one hand, it's irrelevant what other people are going through, but on the other hand, they're going through the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. And so much of it is, especially for executive coaching and advising, is when you think about it, since the late 80s, the idea that companies should mentor and train their people coming in has really gone by the wayside. Like when you're hired, you're expected to know what to do pretty quickly. You might have to learn how our company does what we do, but whatever that thing is, you're supposed to know how to do it and how to deploy it. And yet, our education system does not train people for practical application, right? So you've got that going on, and it's super lonely because, especially if you're in a management or leadership position, who do you talk to when you're stuck?
Yeah.
If you're the boss, you have no one to talk to. You can't talk to your co-manager. You can't talk to your subordinate managers. I hate using subordinate, but you can't talk to the people you manage. Right.
Then you're putting it on them.
And then you're putting it on them, and so you get stuck,
Yeah.
right? And so many leaders get stuck and end up in a position where they can't be their best self because they can't see themselves in the moment of execution. They can't take that step back and be like, that version of me that barked at that person, that's not really me, or I don't see how I'm not going to do that. They're not hearing me, so I gotta bark.
Yeah.
Right, or
So
whatever the
learning
case
another
may be,
way.
right?
Yeah.
And so that's a lot of, what I can pull in when I'm very well resourced. That's a hard one to say, in nature, because it's like, okay, well, let's step back. Let's
Yeah.
observe what happened. Let's do that kind of whatnot, as opposed to making that snap judgment of either you're right or you're wrong, right? One of my coaching questions I end up asking them a lot, and I have to pause sometimes, is like, okay, so how are you participating in the very system or outcomes that you're now frustrated about?
Yes.
How are you participating in that outcome? How are you participating in there? Like, well, I'm not. And then they're thinking about it. Oh shit. Right.
Yeah. One of my biggest, one insight that I found really valuable is systems produce exactly the outcome systems are designed to produce.
Correct. Yeah.
And so if this is what is happening, you can't say, I'm not responsible. You're part of the system and it produced this outcome. Therefore, that is what it is designed to produce. So how can you own it and change the system? But that's a hard thing for folks to own. I'm part of this too.
I'm part of this too. Well, and if you look at it at a macro, I'm not going to go on a major anti-capitalist rant, because those a lot of times go nowhere. But the capitalist system, especially the shareholder capitalist system, is designed to extract the most amount of value out of people as possible. That's the system and that's its design.
Yep.
So if you're a business owner and you've opted into that system, you got to understand that you're always going to have that pressure. You're always going to have that sort of bias, and you're probably going to be reading a lot of people who have that unconscious bias about how things should run.
Yeah.
And so at a certain point, you have to start thinking about, like, oh, that is a product of that paradigm, but I don't have to accept that whole paradigm.
Yeah.
And when I start rejecting that paradigm, there are other things that start to unravel.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
And so it's like, if you try to move to a more There's a big movement right now in my team body of work called, self-organization, right? Which I hate, actually, the word self-organization, because it confuses people,
Yeah.
right? It's actually collaborative organization. It's not you organize yourself and figure out what you're going to do. It's you see a problem and build your own team and way of getting it done,
Yeah.
right? So words matter to me as an author.
Right. Yes, that's right. We're writers. This matters.
This
Yeah.
this matters to me as a writer. This matters to me as a philosopher, right?
Mhm. Yes, defining our terms.
Defining our terms, being specific about what we mean. And so there are so many people who are like, well, I want my team to move to a collaborative decision making or a collaborative organization model. I'm like, that's dope. That also means you need to democratize how decisions are made
Yeah.
and not be the only and or final decision maker. And they're like, well, I
Yes.
don't want to do that. What if they make the wrong decision? And I'm like, they're going to.
Yes.
And also, how many bad decisions have you made?
Right. Right. Yes.
Like, let's put the record out there, right? Your assumption is that you are infallible, or you make enough of the right decisions, or you make better decisions than a group of people that know how to make decisions do. But the actual evidence shows
Yeah.
that, if you get enough of the right people in the room, the crowd will actually have a better idea of estimates, how long things take, so on and so forth, than the leader making the decision.
Yeah. Well,
Right.
and learning to share failure. I think a lot of it comes from the fear, if we make decisions collaboratively, but I'm the boss, I'm going to deal with all the consequences. So how do we make sure that we all understand we all will deal with all the consequences of our choices, and the boss recognizes, oh wait, if the consequences are rolling down on me, they are going to hit everybody else too. So they already have a disincentive to fail. It's not that they're trying to pinch me. They didn't do this isn't personal.
This isn't personal.
But I think that's hard for folks when they're going, I feel the consequences. I don't feel their consequences. Therefore, I can't possibly share leadership because, it'll hurt me.
Yeah, well, but they also, in that case, this is why I'm either a great or terrible executive coach. Listener, you make your mind up about that, right? Because I'm also like, but you don't feel the consequences of your decision in the same way that your teams do,
Yes.
right? You don't feel or see that if you're operating poorly as a leader, for teams, there's a pre-meeting to figure out how to manage you.
Yes.
And then there's a post-meeting to figure out what the hell just happened and how they're going to deal with it.
And what this really meant. Yeah. When the boss said this, how do we now translate that into action? If you weren't clear, you've added this layer of work. Yeah.
But they don't see it because they're not in the meeting. They can't be in the meeting.
Right.
Right. And so it's like, you think you're feeling the consequences of a certain way, or we can change this. And to be clear, I'm not 100% pro collaborative management models, but I'm saying there are trade-offs.
Yeah.
Right. So the pain that I'm asking you to feel is you have to articulate how decisions are made, what matters, what are the priorities, and so on and so forth. You've got to do that work up front.
Yeah.
Right. And then you can take it to people and take the same problems that you stay up late nights trying to figure out and say, this is now yours. This is a part of the collaborative model. And what I've seen so many times is that when people who are all about, like, especially people who are outside of management who don't have that power, actually get handed the full scope of the problem. It's like your decision here will affect whether 50 of your teammates or 50 of your fellow people in this organization have jobs next year or not.
Right.
That's the scope of this job. Like, it is now yours. You've
feel that
wanted this.
already. You're worried
Right.
about, am I going to get fired? And you need to realize they have that fear too.
Yeah. And so it's like, okay, but what I've experienced is, in a lot of ways, once people see that, they're like, actually, I don't want to deal with that.
Yeah.
Right. That's a lot of responsibility. I'm not equipped for it. Like, what if I make the wrong decision? No. Right.
Yeah.
And it's like, that is actually when we start talking about shifting around value and responsibilities and commitments in an organization, it's like, you got to understand that many of those leaders are gripped with that same, I don't know what decision to make here. And I don't want to make a bad decision that next year, 50 of the people that I care about are gone.
Yeah.
right? And so I'm going to drive this decision. I'm going to micromanage, not because I think everyone else is incompetent, but because I am scared
Yeah.
that I am not going to do this well,
Yeah.
right? And that has high stakes, right? And
Right.
so part of what I do, especially in a team or org capacity, is try to get us all to be more human
Yeah.
and talk like, let's get away from these models, let's get away from these degrees, let's get away from some of that and say, like, let's put it on the table what we're actually concerned about
Yeah.
in real human terms. And what we see is that we have far more common than possible. What we'll see a lot of times in that scenario when we lay it all out and I do a facilitation. Sorry, listener, I'm going into a lot of work, but I want people to
No, I mean,
understand
this
the
is
speed, right?
incredibly valuable to folks, regardless of what
Yeah,
field you're in. This is how to get along with your family too. Like team
yeah,
dynamics are so much a part of our lives. So I think this
yeah.
is really wonderful.
And so it's like we put all the things on the table. And what I sometimes will find is like people, especially people who haven't been in management or power positions, they see like, oh shit, those are really decisions that I don't feel equipped or my team doesn't feel equipped to handle. And so every time my boss has been handing me this other projects so that they can focus on those, I now get that,
Yeah.
right? I want them to be in the position to where they are the best resourced to do that, because if they screw that up, like it
Yes.
that's our pay, right? That's our benefits. That's, our quality of life. That's whether or not we get free Fridays or not.
Yeah.
Right. And so, okay, I'm willing to do these types of things that support this unit and trust and respect them. But also the leader's like, okay, since you're doing that, I'm going to get out of the way and let you do what you're doing. Like we understand each other now.
Right. Now that we understand,
Now that we
then
understand each other,
I
we are
can,
in fact on the same team.
yeah, I can
We
give
have
grace to the boss once I understand why the boss is doing what they're doing, and the boss in turn can give me, flexibility and freedom now that they understand why I was resenting this work, but we've got to understand what we're doing.
Yeah. And you got to understand what you're doing. And maybe coming from the position that the person you're talking to is not your enemy.
Yeah. Yeah.
And they're not out to get you or to exploit you or whatever like that. Maybe it's just they have their own mandate,
Yeah.
right?
And like you said, their own emotional state they're bringing to this. They might not tell you I'm scared and therefore making a poor choice, but maybe they're scared and making a poor choice. And it's not malice. They're not evil. They're
Yeah.
frightened. You know?
Well, and that's where, I think it's Hanlon's razor. That it's never attributed to malice what incompetence
Yep.
better explains, right? And so I've expanded on that. Never attributed to character what incompetence or ignorance can better explain,
Yeah.
right? And so, like, P.S. leaders and other people listening to this, most of y'all have imposter syndrome.
Yeah.
You're worried that someone's going to figure out that someone is going to figure out that you don't know what you're doing, or maybe you got promoted and this is the limit of your capabilities and things like that. And so I was consulting with a group, and they were talking about some different things, and I just said bluntly, I was like, well, what we have to really put as the elephant in the room, because it was a massive merger situation where they were bringing in multiple companies, is like, what we have to put on the table is that most of the leaders here are feeling imposter syndrome,
Yep.
and they're trying to avoid being found out.
Yep. Well, and tell me what you think of this, but I think one of the effects of that is it makes us overweight quantitative metrics rather than qualitative,
Correct.
because we're saying, I feel imposter syndrome, but the numbers don't lie. And so even though the numbers might not really be the most important thing, my imposter syndrome forces me to focus on these things that are more easily measured rather than, oh, okay, no, maybe success isn't super easily measured, but when it gets amorphous, it gets scary.
Well, yeah, it's because part of where we are in the West right now is objective information is more valuable than subjective information. And yet, when we look at how we make the most meaningful decisions and the ones that really matter, it's a mix of subjective
Yeah.
and objective, right? And so I end up telling so many leaders and teams who will listen to me, I'm like, if you haven't got to the real heart of the matter, meaning the feelings of the matter, you don't understand how people are bought in or not bought into the situation. To go back to, the Aristotelian forms of argument, like it's always got to be logos, pathos, and ethos. So logos is the rational argument. Pathos is how it feels like and then the ethos is where we get ethics is what does this have to do with how we are in relationship with each other? What's right and what's wrong? Right.
Skip the
And
pathos, you will never persuade anyone.
you will never persuade anyone. Right. And unfortunately, democracies are really prone to pathos driven
Yes.
arguments and communication that aren't backed up by logos and ethos. We see this all the
You'll be
time.
so frustrated. Why is my logos argument not working? It's never going to work.
It's never going to work.
You have to
Right.
connect with
Emotion
people where
drives
they're
action.
emotionally.
Emotion drives action. And that's what you have to understand about people. If you don't know what emotions are driving actions, you're never really going to be able to get people aligned. You'll get people coerced. You can do that.
Yeah.
But you won't actually get them aligned for the long term.
Yeah. So where can folks, this is excellent. Where can folks find you in terms of connecting with you now that they're hearing this and they're like, we need to get more of this? Where can folks find you online?
Okay. So I'll speak to the writers here. In a way you can think about it, Charlie has two personas, right? I have the start finishing, help you get your creative projects done persona, and you can find a lot of that at Productive Flourishing. If you're more interested in the team stuff, you want to go to betterteamhabits.com. The only social media platform that I am even remotely on right now is LinkedIn.
Yeah.
And that's where you can find the one Charlie Gilkey at Charlie Gilkey.
And I will link to all those in the show notes. So folks, as you are listening or watching right now, just scroll down. You've got the links right there. So what is, who is somebody that you think I should have on this show? Who's a guest you'd recommend?
Have you had Jessie?
I have twice. Yes,
Okay.
she's fantastic.
She's a phenom.
Well, and one of the things that's really wonderful about her, and long-term listeners will appreciate this, is I had her on really early on when she was like one of my third or fourth guest or something, and I did not know what I was doing. And she was very gracious, but I like talked the whole time. I was so nervous, every time there was a tiny little bit of silence. And then I had her on again for, I don't know, like the 40th episode. And I was just overt about it. I brought it into the room like, hey, last time I had you on, I was kind of terrible. And she was very gracious. But yeah, she's a dynamo, and what she has done for the writing community has been really inspiring to me. So, folks should not
Jesse's
only
a
check out
triple
her
threat.
work,
Like,
yeah, she's
great.
one
of the few people I know who can ghostwrite, be a fantastic fiction writer, and be a fantastic and prolific nonfiction writer.
Yeah.
That's super hard to do, y'all. Right.
Well, and I think it's because she is a very effective business person. Like, she's managing her business and thinks about it very explicitly as a business, whether it's the fiction, the nonfic. And she thinks of her nonfic as creative too, which is important. Like, you can't go, oh, this is my novel, and then this is this this ghostwriting project. Like, she's in creator mode, very consciously. So
have you had Claire
on again?
Yeah, have you had Claire from the summit on?
No.
I think Claire would be great to be on the show.
Yeah, so I will reach out. Excellent. And then so there's some folks I've got to thank before we wrap up. Thanks to the artist Max Oakland, who reached out and provided one of his songs for our intro song, I Prefer the Dusk. Let Max know you like it by following him on Twitter at Max Oakland with 3 Ds. And thanks to Halisna CCO for their song Kids for the ad break. Thanks to Doug, the producer, for making this show sound good and taking the blame when it doesn't. And I cannot forget to mention, Writers Not Writing is a production of NotAPipePublishing. So please go to NotAPipePublishing.com and check out the amazing books written by writers who didn't procrastinate too much. If you like this show, rate and review it wherever you found it. Please check out Charlie's books. The second one might be, would you say start finishing, how to go from idea to done is the better entry point, or does it just depend on what you need?
It depends on what you need, but if you're primarily thinking about writing and getting your ideas out in the world, that's definitely start finishing, and that's definitely follow me at Productive Flourishing. If team joys and woes are what's on your brain most of the time, then I think that's where the book Team Habits and betterteamhabits.com is a better way to go.
Well, and when you finish those books, please give them a review, folks. Click on
Please.
that 5th star, write a little review. It makes a big difference. So make Charlie's day, give it the 5th star, and let folks know that it mattered to you. And similarly for this show, if you would click that little thumbs up an odd number of times, I would really appreciate it.
An odd
Charlie,
number of times more than 3, please.
yeah. Charlie, as folks are going into their week, what's your advice for them for this next week?
Determine what matters, organize your time and energies towards that, and make peace with what you can't get to.
Yep. And my, variation on the last portion there is I always say to folks, a novel without spaces would be gibberish. And our lives need spaces too. So, don't ignore spaces. And of course, no matter how much you procrastinate, Charlie and I are still proud of
Absolutely. Can I take this gas mask off now, though?
you. Yes. A little warm in there, a little sweaty.
A little sweaty.
Thank you so much for being on the show.
Thanks for having me.
If I take my time.